In many organizations, finance has been outpaced by every other department when it comes to automation and digital transformation, whereas their counterparts in sales and marketing and other groups are a decade ahead. Consequently, finance cannot meet the greater objectives of being an advisor to the business without getting digitally fit. Ernst & Young and Aptitude Software will review a process that you can implement to start improving your finance department's digital fitness and become the strategic business partner needed to guide your organization to success. So I'd love to introduce my panelists for today, Janine Donnelly from EY and Nick Shah from Aptitude Software. Janine, Nick, how are you both today?
Great, thank you for having us. It's quite exciting to be here.
Yeah, likewise. Good to be here, and thanks for inviting us to this webinar.
Fantastic. I think why don't we just kick off with you two giving us a bit of an introduction just to yourselves and your companies and sort of what we're going to be talking about today. So Nick, why don't you go first, just a brief intro to yourself.
Yeah, so I lead up our business architecture function here at Aptitude Software. The overall purpose of the team is to ensure that the products and software solutions that we develop are aligned to particularly the CFO mandate, particularly in a digital finance world. In terms of my background, I joined Aptitude Software earlier this year, and prior to that had 20 years experience mainly in banking and financial services, focusing most recently at HSBC, where I led their finance transformation program.
Fantastic. And then Janine, how about yourself?
Yep. Hi, I'm a partner in our financial services practice for about 20 years in sort of supporting finance functions in predominantly insurance and banking and wealth management, so financial services in dealing with change, be it from a regulatory perspective, from a transaction perspective, and process improvement. So I help our CFO functions understand how they can better operate across process, data, and technology.
Fantastic. Well, it's fantastic to have you both here today. And I'm really excited to this discussion that we're going to get going, because I feel like, digital finance, digital transformation, it's such a huge topic at the moment, and one that, we haven't really scratched the surface of, really, even though it's such a big trending topic. So I think let's just dive right in to my first question, which is, what is driving the need for digital finance transformation? I don't know who wants to take this first. Janine?
No, thanks, Holly. I really appreciate both the question and your introduction, because I think you're absolutely right. And finance functions have been somewhat left behind in the drive to sort of digital transformation. It is clear finance functions definitely have to change. Now, partly the drivers for change is firstly, finance is actually expected to provide speed to insight and to actually support business decisions. And to your earlier point, that the businesses, the revenue generating businesses are actually a little bit in front of finance. So finance have to pick up the pace in order to support those businesses, meeting the different stakeholder requirements, be it the board, be it the regulators, and sort of be the investors of that company. Another sort of key driver of change is the explosion of data. So enterprise data and sort of finance data. So it's finance's responsibility to understand how data passes from source through reports, and there's a lot more data passing in. And that's also going to increase in and over time with new topics, for example, ESG. So that explosion of data, both formally as it goes from source to report, as well as unstructured data, and ensuring the right sort of controls and processes are in around top of that. The evolving workforce is another reason finance functions definitely have to sort of move towards a change and a transformation. Workplace shifts, including sort of that contingent remote access, the ability to automate and how that works, and also sort of the composition of where talent is going to come from in the future around sort of finance functions. And I think that is going to be different for finance professionals in the future, and how they get to their CFO, that the journey will look and be a lot different. So you're better to sort of be part of the journey as opposed to sort of accepting that. I think new technologies, which is why we're here together, new technologies are faster and coming to speed a little bit more quickly. So how can finance functions take advantage of that and not sort of beyond systems that have been there sort of 10, 20 years, so that a new operating model of being and changing and adapting that more quickly, as their other colleagues, as you pointed out, And the last one is heightened transparency demands. So it is clear, and regulators are a sort of a big stakeholder in this. There's increased transparency demands of our organisations, particularly within financial services. And to be honest, the regulators and those organisations are also moving a lot more quicker on transparency and getting access to data. So we, as finance functions, need to, again, continue the pace alongside of those regulators who want and are demanding more access to information. And we have to do this, again, in real time with an increased pressure to be efficient and lower cost. So it is time to change because it's unsustainable in order to meet all those demands under that sort of cost pressure. Nick?
Yeah, absolutely, Janine. And you focus heavily on, obviously, the evolving mandate for finance. I think what's key for me is some of the basics that have always been in a finance function that still need to be done. So a finance function will always be there to close the books, complete the accounting, file statutory returns, file regulatory returns. And actually what's key to that part of the process is doing it in a far more automated way at a better level of quality and doing it faster, so that actually you can start to evolve that finance function to look at the more value add activities. So that's really key. I think we recently did a survey where we said how much of a finance function's time is spent looking backwards, just reporting on what happened in the past. It's a large percentage, somewhere around 70–80% of the time is spent telling people what happened in the last month or the last quarter. What we want a finance function really to be looking at is, tell us what's going to happen next month, tell us what's going to happen next quarter, because actually it's around being able to say, this is where we should be driving the business and providing those business insights to help with the decision-making process. So there's absolutely critical to make sure you get your basics right, do that in a way that's better, faster and cheaper, in order to then really expand the mandate of finance into providing the right business insights.
Yeah, I really love that point of going back to basics. I think we often forget how much time is just spent reporting. So I think, yeah, you're absolutely right. Get back to basics, get that sorted, and then we can really move forward. Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you so much both for that. Moving on then, what is holding finance teams back? What are the barriers in the way?
So I think there's a number of areas here. I mean, finance teams have had so many different priorities over the past 10–20 years. It's one of those where there's obviously been a lot of regulatory change, a lot of focus on regulatory funded programs and initiatives. And I think we've worked on regulatory programs many times, and you all always start off with the best intentions, where you are looking to make other improvements alongside the compliance achievements that you need to get to. However, as you get closer to those compliance deadlines, you will find that some of the what is deemed as nice to have will drop away as requirements, and you will focus heavily on the compliance initiatives. So I think that's been one of the challenges. I think technology has held finance firms back, particularly legacy applications, legacy architectures. We're particularly in the financial services industry. Obviously, whether you've gone through acquisition, you've tried to bring systems integration together, you have ended up with a myriad of siloed data and systems, and almost a spaghetti architecture that needs considerable investment to really start again. If you're a fintech or a new startup, you don't carry a lot of those legacy issues, and therefore it's a much simpler starting place in terms of really providing business insights. So I think there's a number of reasons why it's actually a very complex problem, and that's probably what's holding teams back. So it's not always clear where to start your transformation journey. It's obviously easy to look at something and say, well, this is really complicated, where do we start? But it is picking out almost those low-hanging fruit that you can start with, start to build momentum for your program, and identify where the real value add is, both in terms of knowing your current state, knowing your problem statements that you're trying to solve, and what are your real objectives to transformation. The other thing I'd also say is, we talk a lot about finance transformation, but actually it can't be a finance transformation without the input from other areas or functions within a business. So whether you'll often hear people talk about a finance transformation program, a risk transformation, a compliance transformation. These things all come together, particularly when we look at data and sharing of data across those areas. It can't be done by finance alone. So you really do need to understand the dependencies outside of your direct areas of expertise to really be able to transform the business.
Yeah, I probably want to jump on Nick's point a little bit more and actually even go that step further. And that the more successful finance transformation projects is where the demand is at the enterprise level. Okay, so back to the earlier point, the business need to demand from finance what it is they need from finance. And I think that is one of the keys of what has held people back in the past. And then we start to see shadow finance come out into the business. But finance transformation needs to be a commitment from the enterprise, because it is, to the earlier point, because of some of these points, it is a bit of a long, painful journey, particularly on complex systems landscape. So one of the examples is we've got sort of some current clients in this part of the world. We've got regulatory requirements coming at us, which have time delivery deadlines. Well, they have time delivery in terms of having to meet requirements. So again, to Nick's point, compromises have to be made. We have a lot of organisations at the moment, having great strategic opportunities to use sort of a regulatory requirement like 17 to move towards some kind of transformation. But as the deadline looms, we are starting to see compromises be made, switches to plan Bs in some cases. Now, part of that, you have to be committed to that long-term journey of strategic change, meet the deadlines, but actually use organisation to commit to that longer-term transformation. Complexity in that system landscape, really what that comes down to from a finance perspective is that legacy system landscape. And to take it to a more detailed level, many of those complex system landscapes have finance capabilities sitting in core systems. So again, it goes back almost to that earlier question. We are seeing another impetus to change is that where people and organisations are going on core system replacement, they need to also think about finance transformation at the same time, because finance capabilities will and are no longer being carried in core systems. So again, that enterprise approach to finance transformation is critical. So bringing IT on your path from a sort of complexity of system perspective and data journey, but also the business in terms of demanding what are the questions that they're expecting finance to sort of support on going forward.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. And I feel like, when we think about things like this, obviously there's quite a lot holding finance back. And until you sort of lay it out like that, you don't quite think how much there actually is. But I think going back to your point, Nick, of you pick the low hanging fruit, I think that is really crucial. It's all about the quick wins, isn't it? And not necessarily just in finance, but just sort of in life in general. You pick the quick wins, and that can really trigger and start the ball rolling and get you moving on and on and on, which is fantastic. So how should a finance leader think about building a digital finance function then? We've heard about the challenges, but how do they go about it? Where do they start?
So my view there, I mean, what you've got on the slide, I think, encompasses it, where technology, data, operating model, processes, and people all needs to come together to really make a successful transformation. You can't do any one without the other. What's interesting is actually that how we've laid them out here from left to right. I think they actually increase in complexity as you move to the right, because actually the hardest part with the transformation is often the operating model, the processes, the people, the skills, followed by data. And then, for me, if you get your operating model and your processes right, and you can get your data right, technology will fall into place. There's been so much advancement in technology, whether we're talking about cloud or modular services, and even things like automated testing, deployment models. There's a lot of enhancement in that space. I think if you can almost start from the right hand side here and get that right, it really does simplify a transformation journey. I think data is absolutely critical. I mean, within finance, there's nothing worse in a finance function than having a data set that you don't trust or can't reconcile, or two different teams in the same area or same function looking at two different data sets and drawing different conclusions. So getting to that point where you do have that single rich granular underlying data set that is reconciled with your accounting flows, absolutely critical, that it's a trusted source of data within finance, and that each and every user in finance is therefore always referring to the same underlying data. is key in terms of building out your finance function, not just for continuing, obviously, its accounting and reporting mandate, but also looking at the business decision support. So I think that the data strategy for me is really important. I think when we start to look at technology, what we're starting to see with all finance firms is that move away from big monolithic applications that, you know, provide all of your services in a single one-stop shop. That doesn't exist anymore. I think it really is around picking the best of breed for the various applications that you have, or the various business capabilities that you're looking to deliver. Again, what's really key there is using that same single underlying data set to then really drive each of your finance processes, and you do come up with a far more modular architecture, almost the microservices architecture, where you are picking the right solution for the right problem that you're trying to solve in terms of business capabilities. But again, if you've got that data foundation, technology will fall into place, because there are plenty of options and solutions out there that help you to solve for the more complex calculations that are needed in finance.
Yeah, look, 100% agree. It almost needs to be the other way around. You can only go as fast as each of your different components. So you can only have success when your people, your data, and your tech all move together. But again, 100% agree with Nick. The commitment to change also needs to be there, having the right people in place, being clear on the data. Those the technology-driven transformations without a data strategy, or without the commitment to change and a focus on processes, and just looking at the kit that comes with that technology, they're the ones that don't take, that they haven't taken data into consideration, and they haven't got those change agents in and around. So back to some of our earlier points on what's holding people back, it's almost the switch and use that in order to get in order to take into account how to get started. Be clear on how you're going to approach the finance transformation. Include and get buy-in from the enterprise and from all the right people and all the right stakeholders along that journey. Be clear on being modular in the benefits that you receive as well. I think proof in the pudding is something that people need to take into account in order to sort of prove your success in and around that, which is also really important for a finance function, because at the end of the day, finance still need to produce or commit to their BAU and produce the results every month, every quarter, every external reporting period. And that's hard to sort of balance in with actually doing a transformation. So taking the ways of working and understanding what finance have to do, on a BAU sense into transformation is also critical to how you need to think about a digital finance function. How are you still going to run and produce what you still need to do at the same time as trying to change and prove that you can do it in and along the way? And I think that's an important aspect to sort of transformation journeys that we see as successful versus those that have, a huge budget and a huge spend and take years to sort of get there. I think it's important to show small successes, and it almost goes back to the early point. What are the low-hanging fruits? How do we prove that we can get success and that we're on that journey? But let's be clear about the journey we want to go on in that first place.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, Janine, about, proving that you can do it. I think that obviously is quite crucial. And I think from what you were both saying, data here is very, very key. And, once again, data is really quite in the forefront, which is very interesting. So what benefits can be expected from a finance transformation then? What really are the really good goals that we can see from these?
I think I can sort of start with that. I think control is important, and I think controls and automated controls is something finance need to focus on. So that operational risk, it is absolutely crucial that finance are accountable from how data moves from an organisation from source to report. So the controls in place as you go from one to the other is important, and a focus on that needs to be clear and critical to success. What we want as part of that is automation from source to report. And so those controls, as we see now, are very manual and people focused. There's a lot of, and that leads to higher operational risk in terms of our reliance on key people and key skills. Now, ironically, when we go into some finance areas, those key people skills and reliance are not just on finance people, but as we pointed out before, it's actually on SMEs that belong to core systems that have customizations and things in and around sort of finance related. And those finance transformations where we've had complex finance systems architecture, actually what has held us back and what has added to timeframes is where we've needed access to SMEs of a core system somewhere in and around time. So being clear on the controls from source to report is a key focus in and around that. The automation of those is important. The automation of reporting from that perspective is important. The other part is around that transparency and insight. So it's clear, and it comes back to that sort of key data source. So transformation and the better sort of finance functions are those that have that transparency. And again, it's transparency of the controls, transparency of the source to report, and transparency not just of all reporting that I'm doing. So statutory, regulatory, management, and the transparency between the three. Yes, there needs to be different slices of that to meet those different requirements, but the transparency in the bridge between each is also key. Then I've got the ability, if I automate and putting that, then I've got the ability and the time to provide insights to my business around key business questions, whether that be around their own initiatives and their own transformations, but also about the markets they operate in, the customers they're dealing with, and any sort of acquisitions that they need to think about, any investments they need to think about. So the insights, the questions they need to be challenging their business on, the insights or the questions they need to be supporting their business in what they're doing, is where the actual fun of finance professionals, I think, are in the future.
Yeah, I mean, the controls and the automation points are really critical for me. I think that how you get from the account to report in the most automated way, I always almost look at it from if I'm a financial controller, I should almost be able to sign off my P&L and my balance sheet at the end of a period without looking at the numbers, because I should know my data was perfect when I received it, so I know what had happened, and I know that the processes ran and every single control executed accurately, so therefore the numbers must be right. I don't need to spend extortionate amount of time reviewing the numbers and understanding where they've gone, because I know that my processes and my controls have been executed correctly, that there's been absolutely limited manual intervention in the process, which obviously generates additional risk. So I think that's really key, because that really starts to drive out that better, faster, cheaper finance function that we allude to. What that then allows is that focus on transparency and insight. I think transparency is absolutely critical. I mean, it links to the controls point as well, where particularly from a technology perspective, you can no longer have a black box solution there. You really do need to understand every single transformation that is happening to your data or calculation, and why it's been performed and how it's been performed, and then using that to then obviously drive out the insights and ensuring that finance is that business value add function, rather than being just seen as the reporting or the control function around the books and records.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's clear from what both you've said that there's a lot of value here. There's a lot of value in a finance transformation that these finance professionals really need to start thinking about, which is fantastic. And then looking ahead, what does the future hold? What does the future of finance look like? What are the drivers for change?
Well, I might address it from that people and data and technology perspective. So I think from that people perspective, I think what finance looks in the future is it will have fewer people, but more highly skilled people and different capabilities than you might sort of see now. So you'll have more analytical type people. You'll have more people that can actually work across the process and the data, process experts, and more sort of deeper people in the sort of areas, or in the sort of the more technical areas, be it actuarial or banking kind of risk people. You'll have people that actually understand technology components and can bring that process architecture people. So what can you do, or what's the start of that journey? How do you create that? Well, it's about creating the capacity in your current teams of people. It is actually, that's one of the things that you need to start focusing on, which actually goes back to the think about the low-hanging fruit. What are your people doing now that you don't want them to do in the future? And how do you sort of create the capacity in those high-performing people? How do you create, or how do you sort of give them the skills and the capability of being sort of more, or the softer skills of sort of being analytic, challenging their business? How do you prepare and educate them on understanding not just the process, but the data architectures and the technologies that help sort of that process improvement? What you're trying to do is inbuild that process improvement and consultative nature in the finance team that you've got. So what you have to try and do now is create the capacity. You also need to think about hiring that new capabilities into your finance teams, which is a bit different. So less about the accounting background, and how do you start hiring in that sort of different ways of thinking and capability into your teams, the different ways of working, the more agile set of capabilities, and bring that in. Also start to think about the career paths of the people that you have, and think about how you help embed the nature of your business. So how do you bring people in? How do you get them to understand the business and the metrics of that business? And that may be going out to the business, coming back. It might be going to sort of technology, understand the technologies and back, and that data area. So really thinking about the career paths of people as they come in. I think processes and services. So I think in the future, we will think about the services and not just the processes we provide, understanding where to get those services and processes from. So a focus on end-to-end processes is fundamental in the new ways of working. Being clear where I need to bring that service or carry that service myself, or to bring in support and think about that going forward. And let me bring that to life a little bit. What we're seeing, and what we've seen in the past, is obviously a lot of be it offshoring and outsourcing. And I think with COVID, there's a bit of reimagining of processes, outsourcing, and that service provision, a focus on end-to-end, and then sort of a rebalance of where and how those services are provided. I think what we are seeing now is a focus on, when we focus on services, we can sort of look at the automation of that end-to-end. I think what we have seen in the past, we focused on sort of outsourcing and offshoring of certain parts of the process. We haven't really got to that sort of end-to-end automation. So a re-examining of services and how they're provided. We can with that, so the automation of those more lower transactional type processes, as we look at that, we're actually seeing a little bit of movement in that more technical area of services, where, again, going back to the people, we might have more arrangements where you're looking at expertise and sort of thinking about it at the higher end. So we're seeing a lot more, for example, tax outsourcing. So more expertise at the more expertise end, and actuarial. So how can you work with partners a little bit better to bring in that expertise when you need that, rather than sort of building it in. I think finance functions need to think about, in the future, data is an asset and not a burden. So, and that's fundamental to finance functions in the future. Again, it's finance's accountability, responsibility to know how source is moving to reports. And there's a huge asset to that, both in just meeting my requirements on reporting, but the analysis and insights to that. Lastly, that technology in the future, technology will be at speed and increasing innovation. And again, thinking about that with their service providers. So in the new sort of cloud-based world, you will work more closely with your technology service providers in being innovative and moving and using the capabilities more quickly as your technology service providers increase their capability. How quickly can you move in and around that? So really taking advantage of cloud-based services and the speed of which that creates change and innovation within finance functions.
So for me, when I look at the future of finance, I mean, the first thing I'd say is transformation never stops. There will always be changing demands, new areas, new innovation that will always mean any function needs to continually be evolving and moving forward. So I'm relatively optimistic there, where if you cycle forward 5-10 years and look at a finance function, I'm hoping that we're no longer talking about a finance function the way we talk about it today. And that for me would be a sign of a successful transformation, where, as a finance function, we no longer talk about a period end close process, because actually we have access to real-time data flowing through, and it's a far more simplified process. We don't spend much time talking about accounting and reporting, because these are processes that run in a highly automated way, and therefore do not require a lot of manual intervention and are highly controlled. I think when we look at a finance team, as Janine was saying, we're looking at a very different skill set. We should have a finance function where we have finance professionals who are able to interrogate large volumes of data, that they are, they're not scared of that data. I think they are comfortable looking at a reconciled, controlled data source that is giving them accurate information that they are then able to really use to drive, revenue growth for their business, or to support their business partners in terms of making the right decisions for the broader company. So it's really moving away from finance being seen as a reporting or control function, and moving towards being a real value add partner to business. Even if you look at the ultimate role of the CFO, it is there to support the CEO in making those right strategic decisions around where to grow the business, or decide where to spend investment dollars as well. So I think it really is looking at it from hopefully being able to look back and say, well, we're no longer looking at all those challenges that are blocking finance transformations, or some of the difficulties we have around siloed data, and being able to talk about what's the next stage of that transformation journey.
Fantastic. I think you both raised some brilliant points there. And Janine, I particularly love your data is an asset, not a burden. That's something I'm going to definitely take forward with me as we move on. But unfortunately, that does bring us to the end of our discussion today. I've absolutely really enjoyed the discussion we've had. Hopefully our online audience has as well. Thank you so much for joining us. And thank you, Janine and Nick, for being our panelists and for bringing such a fantastic discussion to the webinar today. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having us.